Calamity lore, Draedon's new full backstory. The new update gave us a lot of information from his point of view, so let's look. So, his origins, he woke up in a taiga in 1227, which is over 6 centuries ago, and he's a machine. His creator has died, and was a prestigious inventor, and by that I mean he was pretty much the only person in the world who was using machines at this point, and Draedon's given purpose is creation and scientific advancement. And so in 1385, he sent out scouting robots to survey the continent for lab expansions, because up until that point he was fine in his small lab, but decided to expand. And unfortunately this attracted a lot of attention, and kind of started up legends about creatures of metal and oil instead of flesh and blood, and so Draedon proceeded to go into hiding for a long time, making these tales into little more than myths. And so, eventually, he learned that this guy named Yharim was trying to conquer a city, and he was being accompanied by an auric dragon, like the guys who went extinct a bajillion years ago. And Draedon knew he had to be part of this. So he sent a scout bot that allowed for two-way communication. After a very tense conversation, Yharim actually ended up recognizing Draedon from these legends of centuries past, and accepted him into his army. Draedon agreed, and essentially they worked out a thing where Draedon would get protection and resources in exchange for providing Yharim with all the weaponry and the means to achieve his goals. And Draedon would go on to find many sources of inspiration and just opportunities for research, noticeably with the Archmage's magic, the Devourer's realm, and the Witch's power. So, to break down the Crusade into a few simple points, it started in 1781 with the rebirth of Yharim, and it took Draedon 22 years to join. Draedon had become head of science and engineering, and he also made widespread surveillance, giving Yharim and Draedon absolute knowledge on their enemies' weaknesses. Now, Draedon came to be mostly known for his death machines throughout the years. Draedon also ended up way later implementing exotechnology into Yharim's armor, which is a reason why he's powerful. Draedon, near the end of the Crusade, kicked out of Yharim's forces after his developments on the Plaguebringer Goliath. So, one of his first major projects was the Mechanical Trio, inspired by the way that auric souls of the dragons would grant power to beings who absorbed them. Draedon set out to try this with normal souls, and he discovered that this works by the soul's intense emotions or resolve, which is really good because Yharim is very charismatic and can inspire a lot of troops to just be willing to give up their souls when they die. And the machines were packed with literal thousands of people's combined experience in combat, and they're very powerful. However, Draedon really didn't like them because they are not fully subject to his commands, and although nothing went bad, he didn't like that it could. Yharim, however, fully approved of it and saw it as a complete win, but Draedon pledged to remove the imperfection from any future progress. So, also, little side note, canonically, you're the one who gave them their kind of dumb names, and Draedon hates the names you chose. So the Sulphurous Sea was never a pleasant place due to the fumes from as if we were polluting the ocean, but it did eventually just become a nuclear waste disposal area for Draedon, and now he's become intrigued by how the life is adapted to these conditions, and this information would go a long way in his development of the Nanoplague. I'll talk about it later. Draedon has no actual plans to irradiate it further, and actually has the technology in place to rebuild the entire sea from the ground up. He literally says it would be trivial. He can just do that, I guess. Draedon polluting this area, however, did cause a lot of public backlash, but Draedon literally does not understand why. So, the Astral infection is kind of interesting. Basically, it's been really annoying for Draedon, because any machines he sends in just get taken over. He tried going in himself in a recon body, but they just got demolished by all the enemies there. He sent in mercenaries, and most of them died. But a few came back and gave him some information, notably that Astral is guarding this area, which leads Draedon to the conclusion that this can't just be like one guy who is basically eating up every diseased star. It has to be a species, otherwise things would be going very, very poorly. Oh yeah, also, he plans to cleanse all of space of the infection at some point. That's one of his future goals. So the Devourer of Gods. Draedon had kind of a hard time doing research on the Devourer due to lack of comparison material, there's not really anything similar to it, and the Devourer is really suspicious of any questions he asks. So Draedon also recognized that the Devourer couldn't have made the distortion portal that's in the dungeon, as the portals that the Devourer makes are very unstable. So, interestingly enough, the Stormweaver, who also came from the distortion, and Yharim was convinced is part of the same species, is not from the same species. Draedon, in fact, theorizes that it could even be older than the Devourer, which is interesting. Now, Draedon has no idea what happens when the Devourer eats a god's essence. All he knows is that it seems to vanish from the Devourer's body almost immediately, as there is no trace left. And so, he knows it has to be going somewhere. Also, every creature in the distortion seems to be part of a hive mind being granted intelligence that normally they shouldn't have, which is interesting. And now that the Devourer is dead, Draedon has pretty much concluded that it's unlikely he'll ever get concrete answers on any of this information. So, Calamitas, there's a lot going on here. Draedon was Yharim's greatest asset for just a long time, but then that changed very late in the war when Calamitas joined Yharim's army. Permafrost fully opposed her fighting, but Yharim would often just send her out when he's busy. And Yharim did actually put effort into training Calamitas, though, and found out that she has a very poor grasp on even the foundational magics. When it comes to Brimstone magic in particular, her power rivals Yharim himself. And Draedon came to the conclusion that Calamitas could not have been born with this power because there's no trace of any of this anywhere, and she could not have hid this as a child. And he eventually traced her magic back to the Brimstone Elemental herself, but he hasn't been able to it's clear there's implications here, but he hasn't delved far enough into it yet. But after Calamitas and Permafrost left, Yharim tasked Draedon with matching the power of her flames, although this never came to happen because Draedon was fired shortly thereafter due to said nano-plague I mentioned earlier. So Draedon eventually went on to try and do this on his own. The first thing he tried was making a clone of Calamitas to see if that would work, but the clone had none of her power, confirming her magic was not something she was born with. Although Calamitas, strangely, would later break this clone out, and afterwards, the clone started to be able to wield a small piece of her power. So, the nanoplague was built to essentially mass enslave and improve upon animal life forms, and he basically went into this field because he was trying at this point to match the powers of the Witch, Braylor's status, and Yharim as they grew just increasingly stronger. By the way, he does actually have a failsafe. He has the means to disable the plague if he feels the need to. But Yharim ended up getting very upset when he discovered the Plaguebringer and flew into a rage, blasted his lab, and intentionally allowed the Plaguebringer to escape. And Draedon, obviously, was fired. So anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please like and sub. I'm going to go into Access Technology in a future video. It's way too much to put in this video. So yeah, that's it.